Alan Mathison Turing OBE FRS was a pioneering English computer scientist, mathematician, logician, cryptanalyst and theoretical biologist. He was highly influential in the development of theoretical computer science, providing a formalization of the concepts of algorithm and computation with the Turing machine, which can be considered a model of a general-purpose computer. Turing is widely considered to be the father of theoretical computer science and artificial intelligence. During the Second World War, Turing worked for the government code and Cypher school at Bletchley Park, Britain's codebreaking centre. For a time he led Hut 8, the section responsible for German naval cryptanalysis. He devised a number of techniques for breaking German ciphers, including improvements to the pre-war Polish bomb method and an electromechanical machine that could find settings for the Enigma machine. Turing played a pivotal role in cracking intercepted coded messages that enabled the Allies to defeat the Nazis in many crucial engagements, including the Battle of the Atlantic. It has been estimated that this work shortened the war in Europe by as many as 4 years. After the war, he worked at the National Physical Laboratory, where he designed the ACE, among the first designs for a stored program computer. In 1948, Turing joined Max Newman's computing machine laboratory at the Victoria University of Manchester, where he helped develop the Manchester computers and became interested in mathematical biology. He wrote a paper on the chemical basis of morphogenesis and predicted oscillating chemical reactions such as the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction, first observed in the 1960s. Turing was prosecuted in 1952 for homosexual acts, when such behavior was still a criminal act in the UK. He accepted treatment with DES as an alternative to prison. Turing died in 1954, 16 days before his 42nd birthday, from cyanide poisoning. An inquest determined his death as suicide, but it has been noted that the known evidence is equally consistent with accidental poisoning. In 2009, following an internet campaign, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown made an official public apology on behalf of the British government for the appalling way he was treated. Queen Elizabeth II granted him a posthumous pardon in 2013. Early life. Turing was born in Maida Vale, London, while his father, Julius Mathison Turing, was on leave from his position with the Indian Civil Service at Chhatrapur, Bihar and Orissa Province, in British India. Turing's father was the son of a clergyman, the Rev. John Robert Turing, from a Scottish family of merchants that had been based in the Netherlands and included a baronet. Turing's mother, Julius's wife, was Ethel Sarah, daughter of Edward Wallace Stoney, chief engineer of the Madras Railways. The Stoneys were a Protestant Anglo-Irish gentry family from both County Tipperary and County Longford, while Ethel herself had spent much of her childhood in County Clare. Julius's work with the ICS brought the family to British India, where his grandfather had been a general in the Bengal Army. However, both Julius and Ethel wanted their children to be brought up in Britain, so they moved to Maida Vale, London, where Turing was born on the 23rd of June 1912, as recorded by a blue plaque on the outside of the house of his birth, later the Colonnade Hotel. He had an elder brother, John. Turing's father's civil service commission was still active, and during Turing's childhood years, Turing's parents travelled between Hastings in England and India, leaving the two sons to stay with a retired army couple. At Hastings, Turing stayed at Beeston Lodge, Upper Maze Hill, St Leonards-on-Sea, now marked with a blue plaque. Very early in life, Turing showed signs of the genius that he was later to display prominently. His parents purchased a house in Guildford in 1927, and Turing lived there during school holidays. The location is also marked with a blue plaque. Education. School. Turing's parents enrolled him at St. Michael's, a day school at 20 Charles Road, St. Leonards-on-Sea, at the age of 6. The headmistress recognized his talent early on, as did many of his subsequent educators. In 1926, at the age of 13, he went on to Sherborne School, an independent school in the market town of Sherborne in Dorset. The first day of term coincided with the 1926 general strike in Britain, but he was so determined to attend that he rode his bicycle unaccompanied 60 miles from Southampton to Sherborne, stopping overnight at an inn. Turing's natural inclination towards mathematics and science did not earn him respect from some of the teachers at Sherborne, whose definition of education placed more emphasis on the classics. His headmaster wrote to his parents, "I hope he will not fall between two stools. If he is to stay at public school, he must aim at becoming educated. If he is to be solely a scientific specialist, he is wasting his time at a public school." Despite this, Turing continued to show remarkable ability in the studies he loved, solving advanced problems in 1927 without having studied even elementary calculus. In 1928, aged 16, Turing encountered Albert Einstein's work. Not only did he grasp it, but it is possible that he managed to deduce Einstein's questioning of Newton's laws of motion from a text in which this was never made explicit. Christopher Morcom. At Sherborne, Turing formed a significant friendship with fellow pupil Christopher Morcom, who has been described as Turing's first love. The relationship provided inspiration in Turing's future endeavors, but it was cut short by Morcom's death in February 1930, from complications of bovine tuberculosis, contracted after drinking infected cow's milk some years previously. The event caused Turing great sorrow. He coped with his grief by working that much harder on the topics of science and mathematics that he had shared with Morcom. In a letter to Morcom's mother, Turing said, "I am sure I could not have found anywhere another companion so brilliant and yet so charming and unconceited. I regarded my interest in my work, and in such things as astronomy, as something to be shared with him, and I think he felt a little the same about me. I know I must put as much energy, if not as much interest, into my work as if he were alive, because that is what he would like me to do." Some have speculated that Morcom's death was the cause of Turing's atheism and materialism, but this seems unlikely. Apparently, at this point in his life he still believed in such concepts as a spirit, independent of the body and surviving death. In a later letter, also written to Morcom's mother, Turing said, "Personally, I believe that spirit is really eternally connected with matter, but certainly not by the same kind of body. As regards the actual connection between spirit and body, I consider that the body holds on to its spirit, whilst the body is alive and awake. The two are firmly connected. When the body is asleep, I cannot guess what happens, but when the body dies, the mechanism of the body holding the spirit is gone, and the spirit finds a new body sooner or later, perhaps immediately." University and work on computability. After Sherborne, Turing studied as an undergraduate from 1931 to 1934 at King's College, Cambridge, whence he gained first-class honours in mathematics. In 1935, at the age of 22, he was elected a Fellow of King's on the strength of a dissertation in which he proved the central limit theorem, despite the fact that the committee had failed to identify that it had already been proven in 1922 by Jarl Valdemar Lindeberg. In 1936, Turing published his paper on computable numbers, with an application to the Entscheidungs problem. In this paper, Turing reformulated Kurt Gödel's 1931 results on the limits of proof and computation, replacing Gödel's universal arithmetic-based formal language with the formal and simple hypothetical devices that became known as Turing machines. Entscheidungs's problem was originally posed by German mathematician David Hilbert in 1928. Turing proved that his universal computing machine would be capable of performing any conceivable mathematical computation if it were representable as an algorithm. He went on to prove that there was no solution to the decision problem by first showing that the halting problem for Turing machines is undecidable. It is not possible to decide algorithmically whether a Turing machine will ever halt. Although Turing's proof was published shortly after Alonzo Church's equivalent proof using his lambda calculus, Turing's approach is considerably more accessible and intuitive than Church's. It also included a notion of a universal machine, with the idea that such a machine could perform the tasks of any other computation machine. According to the Church-Turing thesis, Turing machines and the lambda calculus are capable of computing anything that is computable. John von Neumann acknowledged that the central concept of the modern computer was due to Turing's paper. To this day, Turing machines are a central object of study in theory of computation. From September 1936 to July 1938, Turing spent most of his time studying under Church at Princeton University. In addition to his purely mathematical work, he studied cryptology and also built 3 of 4 stages of an electromechanical binary multiplier. In June 1938, he obtained his PhD from Princeton. His dissertation, Systems of Logic Based on Ordinals, introduced the concept of ordinal logic and the notion of relative computing, where Turing machines are augmented with so-called oracles, allowing the study of problems that cannot be solved by Turing machines. When Turing returned to Cambridge, he attended lectures given in 1939 by Ludwig Wittgenstein about the foundations of mathematics. Remarkably, the lectures have been reconstructed verbatim, including interjections from Turing and other students, from students' notes. Turing and Wittgenstein argued and disagreed, with Turing defending formalism and Wittgenstein propounding his view that mathematics does not discover any absolute truths, but rather invents them. Cryptanalysis. During the Second World War, Turing was a leading participant in the breaking of German ciphers at Bletchley Park. The historian and wartime codebreaker Asher Briggs has said, "You needed exceptional talent. You needed genius at Bletchley, and Turing's was the genius." From September 1938, Turing had been working part-time with the GC&AMP-CS, the British code-breaking organisation. He concentrated on cryptanalysis of the Enigma, with Dilly Knox, a senior GC&AMP-CS codebreaker. Soon after the July 1939 Warsaw meeting, at which the Polish Cypher Bureau had provided the British and French with the details of the wiring of Enigma routers and the method of decrypting Enigma code messages, Turing and Knox started to work on a less fragile approach to the problem. The Polish method relied on an insecure indicator procedure that the Germans were likely to change, which they did in May 1940. Turing's approach was more general, using crib-based decryption, for which he produced the functional specification of the bomb. On the 4th of September 1939, the day after the UK declared war on Germany, Turing reported to Bletchley Park, the wartime station of GC&AMP-CS, specifying the bomb was the first of 5 major cryptanalytical advances that Turing made during the war. The others were deducing the indicator procedure used by the German Navy, developing a statistical procedure for making much more efficient use of the bombs dubbed Banbarismus, developing a procedure for working out the cam settings of the wheels of the Lorenz SZ4040 dubbed Turingery, and Towards the end of the war, the development of a portable secure voice scrambler at Bletchley Park that was codenamed Delilah, by using statistical techniques to optimize the trial of different possibilities in the code-breaking process. Turing made an innovative contribution to the subject. He wrote 2 papers discussing mathematical approaches, titled The Applications of Probability to Cryptography and paper on Statistics of Repetitions, which were of such value to GC in AMP/CS and its successor GCHQ that they were not released to the UK National Archives until April 2012, shortly before the centenary of his birth. A GCHQ mathematician said at the time that the fact that the contents had been restricted for some 70 years demonstrated their importance. Turing had something of a reputation for eccentricity at Bletchley Park. He was known to his colleagues as Professor, and his treatise on Enigma was known as the Prof's Book. Jack Good, a cryptanalyst who worked with him, is quoted by Ronald Lewin as having said of Turing, "In the first week of June each year he would get a bad attack of hay fever, and he would cycle to the office wearing a service gas mask to keep the pollen off. His bicycle had a fault. The chain would come off at regular intervals. Instead of having it mended, he would count the number of times the pedals went round and would get off the bicycle in time to adjust the chain by hand." Another of his eccentricities is that he chained his mug to the radiator pipes to prevent it being stolen. While working at Bletchley, Turing, who was a talented long-distance runner, occasionally ran the 40 miles to London when he was needed for high-level meetings, and he was capable of world-class marathon standards. Turing tried out for the 1948 British Olympic team, hampered by an injury. His tryout time for the marathon was only 11 minutes slower than British silver medalist Thomas Richard's Olympic race time of 2 hours 35 minutes. He was Walton Athletic Club's best runner, a fact discovered when he passed the group while running alone. In 1945, Turing was awarded the OBE by King George VI for his wartime services, but his work remained secret for many years. Bomb. Within weeks of arriving at Bletchley Park, Turing had specified an electromechanical machine that could help break Enigma more effectively than the Polish bomber Cryptologiczna, from which its name was derived. The bomb, with an enhancement suggested by mathematician Gordon Welchman, became one of the primary tools, and the major automated one, used to attack Enigma-enciphered messages. Jack Good opined, Turing's most important contribution, I think, was of part of the design of the bomb, the cryptanalytic machine. He had the idea that you could use, in effect, a theorem in logic which sounds, to the untrained ear, rather absurd, namely that, from a contradiction, you can deduce everything. The bomb searched for possible correct settings used for an Enigma message, using a suitable crib, a fragment of probable plaintext. For each possible setting of the rotors, the bomb performed a chain of logical deductions based on the crib, implemented electrically. The bomb detected when a contradiction had occurred and ruled out that setting, moving on to the next. Most of the possible settings would cause contradictions and be discarded, leaving only a few to be investigated in detail. The first bomb was installed on the 18th of March 1940. By late 1941, Turing and his fellow cryptanalysts Gordon Welchman, Hugh Alexander, and Stuart Milner Barry were frustrated. Building on the work of the Poles, they had set up a good working system for decrypting Enigma signals, but they only had a few people and a few bombs, so they did not have time to translate all the signals. In the summer, they had had considerable success, and shipping losses had fallen to under 100,000 tons a month, but they were still on a knife edge. They badly needed more resources to keep abreast of German adjustments. They had tried to get more people and fund more bombs through the proper channels, but they were getting nowhere. Finally, breaking all the rules, on the 28th of October they wrote directly to Winston Churchill spelling out the difficulties. With Turing as the first named, they emphasized how small the need was compared with the vast expenditure of men and money by the forces and compared with the level of assistance they could offer to the forces. As Andrew Hodges, biographer of Turing, later wrote, this letter had an electric effect. Churchill wrote a memo to General Ismay, which read, "Action this day. Make sure they have all they want on extreme priority and report to me that this has been done." On the 18th of November, the chief of the Secret Service reported that every possible measure was being taken. The cryptographers at Bletchley Park did not know of the Prime Minister's response, but as Milner Barry later recalled, "All that we did notice was that almost from the day the rough ways began miraculously to be made smooth, more than 200 bombs were in operation by the end of the war." Part 8 and the naval enigma. Turing decided to tackle the particularly difficult problem of German naval enigma because no one else was doing anything about it, and I could have it to myself. In December 1939, Turing solved the essential part of the naval indicator system, which was more complex than the indicator systems used by the other services. That same night, he also conceived of the idea of Banburismus, a sequential statistical technique to assist in breaking the naval enigma, though I was not sure that it would work in practice, and was not, in fact, sure until some days had actually broken. For this, he invented a measure of weight of evidence that he called the Banburismus could rule out certain sequences of the Enigma rotors, substantially reducing the time needed to test settings on the bombs. In 1941, Turing proposed marriage to Hut 8 colleague Joan Clark, a fellow mathematician and cryptanalyst, but their engagement was short-lived. After admitting his homosexuality to his fiancée, who was reportedly unfazed by the revelation, Turing decided that he could not go through with the marriage. Turing traveled to the United States in November 1942 and worked with U.S. Navy cryptanalysts on the naval enigma and bomb construction in Washington. He also visited the computing machine laboratory in Dayton, Ohio. His reaction to the American bomb design was far from enthusiastic. "It seems a pity for them to go out of the way to build a machine to do all this stopping if it is not necessary. I am now converted to the extent of thinking that, starting from scratch on the design of a bomb, this method is about as good as our own." The American bomb program was to produce 336 bombs, one for each wheel order. I used to smile inwardly at the conception of test can hardly be considered conclusive, as they were not testing for the bounce with electronic stop-finding devices. During this trip, he also assisted at Bell Labs with the development of secure speech devices. He returned to Bletchley Park in March 1943. During his absence, Hugh Alexander had officially assumed the position of head of Hut 8, although Alexander had been de facto head for some time. Turing became a general consultant for cryptanalysis at Bletchley Park. Alexander wrote as follows about his contribution: "There should be no question in anyone's mind that Turing's work was the biggest factor in Hut 8's success. In the early days, he was the only cryptographer who thought the problem worth tackling, and not only was he primarily responsible for the main theoretical work within the Hut, but he also shared with with Welchman and gained the chief credit for the invention of the bomb. It is always difficult to say that anyone is absolutely indispensable, but if anyone was indispensable to Hut 8, it was Turing. The pioneer's work always tends to be forgotten when experience and routine later make everything seem easy, and many of us in Hut 8 felt that the magnitude of Turing's contribution was never fully realized by the outside world. Turing. In July 1942, Turing devised a technique termed Turing for use against the Lorenz cipher messages produced by the Germans' new Geheimschreiber machine. This was a teleprinter rotor cipher attachment codenamed Tunny at Bletchley Park. Turing was a method of wheel breaking, i.e. a procedure for working out the cam settings of Tunny's wheels. He also introduced the Tunny team to Tommy Flowers, who, under the guidance of Max Newman, went on to build the Colossus computer, the world's first programmable digital electronic computer, which replaced a simpler prior machine, and whose superior speed allowed the statistical decryption techniques to be applied usefully to the messages. Some have mistakenly said that Turing was a key figure in the design of the Colossus computer. Turing and the statistical approach of Van Brysmus undoubtedly fed into the thinking about cryptanalysis of the Lorenz cipher, but he was not directly involved in the Colossus development. Delilah. Following his work at Bell Labs in the US, Turing pursued the idea of electronic enciphering of speech in the telephone system, and in the latter part of the war, he moved to work for the Secret Service's Radio Security Service at Hounslow Park. There he further developed his knowledge of electronics with the assistance of engineer Donald Bailey. Together they undertook the design and construction of a portable secure voice communications machine codenamed Delilah. It was intended for different applications, lacking capability for use with long-distance radio transmissions, and in any case, Delilah was completed too late to be used during the war, though the system worked fully, with Turing demonstrating it to officials by encrypting and decrypting a recording of a Winston Churchill speech. Delilah was not adopted for use. Turing also consulted with Bell Labs on the development of SIGSALY, a secure voice system that was used in the later years of the war.